County today to speak to us on nitrate and cyanazine degradates in groundwater. Jill has more than 25 years of experience in environmental protection, widely recognized for her work focusing on reducing agricultural impacts on groundwater, protecting groundwater sustainability, and advocating for owners of private drinking water wells. And as examples of this, she served as project lead for the 2020-2030 Dakota County Groundwater Plan, which actually got me interested in her work, which identifies county goals, strategies, and to protect groundwater resources. And she managed the Hastings Area Nitrate Study, honored by the National Groundwater Association as a Groundwater Protection Project of the Year. And she led a team of groundwater protection staff in creating private well profiles for at-risk communities for Dakota County's townships and small cities, a project that was recognized by the National Association of Counties and their award for innovation. She serves on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Pesticide Management Plan Advisory Committee and served on the advisory panel for MDA's revised nitrogen fertilizer management plan. Jill has degrees from Wellesley College and the University of North Texas. Jill, it's great to have you with us, and looking forward to hear what you have to say about nitrate and cyanazine degradates in groundwater. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and it's my privilege to be here, and I appreciate that generous introduction. So, as Mark said, I will be talking about nitrate and cyanazine degradates in Dakota County groundwater. And as I go along, this is, as Mark indicated, this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And so, if there are if I don't explain things well, please do ask questions either in the chat or at the end. I would be more than happy to talk about it some more. What I'll be covering today is, a brief introduction to Dakota County and its reliance on groundwater. I'll talk about the groundwater sensitivity in the county, how susceptible we are to contamination. Talk a little bit about, in general, about our private drinking water well issues, and then talk more in detail about both nitrate and about cyanazine degradates. I'm starting to call cyanazine degradates Minnesota's next set of forever chemicals, unfortunately. So this is a new area of concern both for us and for the state of Minnesota, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Dakota County is in the Twin Cities metro. We're directly south of St. Paul, and we are the third most populous county in Minnesota after Hennepin and Ramsey counties. Even though we have a large population, we have about 500,000 people who live here, we are still about half of the county is urbanized. It's what I would mostly call a suburban type development in the northern part of the county, up with where Eagan, Burnsville, South St. Paul, communities like that. But about half of the county's land area is still agricultural. Dakota County is extremely dependent on groundwater. Unlike the Twin Cities, which predominantly use Mississippi River water, Dakota County's public water suppliers do use groundwater. Excuse me. In addition to that, we have about 8,000 households that use private drinking water wells. And what you can see on this map, the blue circles are actual land covered by agricultural irrigation wells. Dakota County is the second largest user of agricultural irrigation in the state of Minnesota. We have about 500 permits for agricultural irrigation permits. So, and in addition to that, we have a number of large industrial users. Flint Hills Refinery uses as much water as a small city. And in addition to that, we do have operations like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Kemp's all have facilities here in Dakota County. We are highly reliant on having good quality groundwater, but it's a real challenge here because we have soil and groundwater conditions that make our groundwater particularly susceptible to groundwater pollution. What this map shows, this is from the Dakota County Geologic Atlas, and what it shows is how quickly any kind of contamination can move from the ground surface down to the drinking water aquifers that are below that. And as I said, this is based on the geology. We have the bedrock that's underneath the county is predominantly karst, which is fractured limestone. In addition, we have a lot of glacial sand and gravel in the eastern part of the county. So as I said, we're reliant on groundwater, but our groundwater is susceptible to pollution. This shows up when we look at our private drinking water wells. We've had a number of sampling programs to test the quality of drinking water. A lot of this does focus on agricultural chemicals, particularly nitrate and herbicides and herbicide degradates. But we also have issues with naturally occurring or what some call geologically derived contaminants, such as manganese and arsenic. We have anywhere from 20 to 25% of our private wells exceed the drinking water standard for nitrate. We have roughly 10% of our wells exceed the drinking water standard for cyanazine and its degradates, and I'll talk more about that as I get into this. We also in the parts of the county that don't have issues with agricultural chemicals, we tend to have issues with geologically derived contaminants, manganese in particular, in the northern and western part of the county. About a third of the wells that we've tested do exceed the drinking water standard there. We have arsenic is present in a lot of our wells, but we don't have the issues with high arsenic that occur in other parts of the state. But this talk, as I said, will predominantly focus on nitrate and cyanazine degradates. With nitrate, we have a couple of public water supplies that have elevated nitrates. It has rarely exceeded the drinking water standard, but it has gotten closer and closer. Hastings is the most notable one of those, and although the city of Rosemount's public water supply also has nitrate levels that's been going up. The city of Hastings has had to install a nitrate removal system, which cost them about $3 million it's a community of about 15,000 people, so that's a lot of money to provide their clean drinking water. And unfortunately, what we see is that the nitrate levels in the eastern part of the county are not only high, but they're going up. The blue lines on this show these are the Department of Health's water testing numbers for the city of Hastings. The top line is the trend of maximum nitrate in the Hastings wells. The next blue line down is their average nitrate results. I think they have 8 wells, and they do a combination of blending and treatment so that the water they provide the public does meet their drinking water standards. In the city of Rosemount, their average has pretty much stayed the same, but they do have one well in particular where the nitrate levels have been going up steadily. In addition, we have, as I mentioned, Dakota County has about 8,000 households that are on private drinking water wells, and about half, or more like 5,000 of those, are in rural Dakota County. We do have people who use drinking water, who have private wells in every community within the county, even in the urbanized areas. We've had a long history of collecting nitrate samples and helping people understand those results. So overall, we have about 10,000 records of nitrate samples in the county. One of the most notable of these projects was when the Department of Agriculture started its township testing program, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. Their township testing program is a effort that they have been doing since 2013. We were the pilot area for this, and through this program, the people who live in townships that are at risk of elevated nitrate, and that's based on their soil conditions and the amount of acreage they have in crop agriculture. Every household in those communities was given a test kit for a free nitrate sample. About 5,000 people were given this opportunity, and about 14,000 of them, 5,000 households had the opportunity. About 1,400 of them did take us up on that. Where the threshold for a community that has too much nitrate in its private drinking water wells is considered roughly 5% of the households. We were unpleasantly surprised at what we found. We knew we had issues, but what we found from this with this was worse than what we expected. In particular, right next to Hastings, there in the eastern part of the county, in Marchand Township, more than half of the drinking water wells exceeded the standard for nitrate, and in the surrounding townships, Vermilion and Hampton, the levels were also extremely high. So we were, as I said, we were unpleasantly surprised at how poor the conditions were. What we have also seen is that over time, as Mark mentioned, I've been working on this a long time, and these are not my personal. This is not my personal information, but I have seen this trend myself. This is actually a set of videos that Bill Olson, who is currently unfortunately retiring from Dakota County, put together. And what this shows is how the nitrate levels in Dakota County have changed over time, where there's a lot going on in this figure, but going from left to right is images of the nitrate samples for the county from 1991 through 2016. Going down is the depth below the water table of the wells that are being represented. So 25, 100, and 280 feet. Red, of course, is high levels of nitrate. The turquoise color is medium, and blue is low or non-detect. The white areas are areas where we didn't have samples at that time. And what you can see from this is that the area of the county that has high nitrate has expanded over that time. Unfortunately, over the same period, the levels where we're finding high nitrate have gotten deeper. When I first started working on this, we saw so little high nitrate in the Jordan aquifer, which is our one of our main drinking water aquifers, and the deeper of our drinking water aquifers. We saw so little nitrate there that we thought it had some special geochemical properties. And unfortunately, what we have found since then is the nitrate just hadn't gotten there yet, that the nitrate levels in the Jordan aquifer are now, we do often see high nitrate levels in wells in the Jordan aquifer. And what farmers sometimes tell us is, well, they're doing the right things, and it just hasn't shown up yet. And unfortunately, that's not what we see in this map. We do believe that farmers have made a lot of improvements in their practices regarding nitrogen fertilizer, but it's the shallow groundwater is getting worse, and the deeper groundwater is getting worse, unfortunately. This is, the question was the 25-foot wells. It's actually it's 25 feet below the water table, and we do have drinking water wells in the county that are that shallow. About 40% of the household drinking water wells in the county are from before the well code, and so they are both shallow, and in most cases they're not grounded. They're not as well constructed as the newer ones. What this map shows, this is another project that Bill Olson did. He actually looked at shallow groundwater, and in this case, it was defined as 20 feet below the water table or less. And so he took all of our nitrate samples, both from public wells and private wells, and cut it down to the shallow ones. So we started with a data set of about 10,000 wells, cut it down to about 900 wells. These are samples from 2013 through 2019, and interpolated the nitrate results from them. The blue is in the 0 to 5 range. The yellow is in the 5 to 10 range. 10 is 10 milligrams per liter is the drinking water standard for nitrate. The red is 10 and above, and the purple are very high nitrate levels. So this is very similar in the terms of geographic area to what we found from the township testing, but it does give us a sense of where the issues are. We're particularly interested in the shallow groundwater because, as for a couple of reasons, it's not because we're trying to make things worse than they really are. It's just the opposite, which is that what we are hoping to see as we continue to work with farmers and the Department of Agriculture and University of Minnesota Extension work with farmers to improve practices, that where we will see improvements is in the shallow groundwater. It's where all the groundwater starts out. So whatever we see in the shallow groundwater will eventually migrate down to deeper levels. So what are our next steps? We are working with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, but we also have our own efforts that are underway. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has a nitrogen fertilizer management plan, and a couple of years ago they adopted a groundwater protection rule, which is a regulatory effort. They are in the process of implementing this, and the Hastings drinking water supply management area is one of their priority areas to address. The way the groundwater protection rule is written, it has a couple of pieces. The first piece restricts the parts of the state where nitrogen fertilizer can be used in the fall. And the significance of that is there are places like Dakota County that have very coarse textured soils. And when farmers put on nitrogen fertilizer in the fall, there's a very high tendency for that to get lost to the groundwater before it can be used by the plants next year. And so all of the purple areas that you see on the map, which is most of Dakota County, are areas that fall under that first restriction where fall nitrogen fertilizer is not allowed. The second phase of the Department of Agriculture's efforts is to categorize public water supplies that have high nitrate. The ones where the nitrate is over 5.4 milligrams per liter, which is roughly half of the drinking water standard, are considered mitigation levels. The first mitigation level is level 1, and the city of Rosemount's drinking water supply is in that. The city of Hastings is level 2, which is a more serious level. It means that they anticipate that the nitrate levels in those wells will exceed the drinking water standard within 10 years. In addition, pardon me. In addition, because of the interactions between the groundwater and the Vermilion River, the city of Hastings has geographically the largest drinking water supply management area in the state. And what that describes is that's the area, it's the geographic area where it's the geographic land area where water that falls there in the terms of precipitation may reach the municipal drinking water supply well within 10 years. And so it's a special area of protection for drinking water quality. In addition, excuse me. In addition to what the Department of Dakota County is working with the Department of Agriculture on implementing the groundwater rule within Dakota County, but we've got our own thing going on too. As Mark mentioned, early this year, Dakota County adopted its new groundwater plan, which is in effect for 10 years. And one of the things that calls for is for us to develop an independent effort, which we're calling the Agricultural Chemical Reduction Effort, or ACRE, to reduce agricultural chemicals in our groundwater to a greater extent than what the Department of Ag has in mind. Their standard is that the groundwater, they have a couple of standards in the rule. One is that the groundwater doesn't get any worse, and the other is that within an impacted drinking water supply management area, 80% of the crop acreage needs to be being managed under best management practices. That if those conditions aren't met, then there are regulatory measures that can come into play. In Dakota County's opinion, that accepts the status quo. It says that what we have currently is good enough. And Dakota County doesn't agree with that. We would like to see our groundwater actually get better so that we do go below that level where fewer than 5% of our private wells exceed the drinking water standard, and where the groundwater is below, on average, is below the drinking water standard. And so we're in the process of developing this. As I said, we're working with the Department of Ag, but we also have our own effort, which is intended to be somewhat more rigorous than what the Department of Ag is doing. And it may involve a regulatory component on the county's part. The local units of government are not legally precluded from regulating nitrogen fertilizer, and so that may be a direction that the county goes in time. So we've got new efforts that are underway regarding nitrate contamination. The next thing I'm going to talk about is cyanazine and cyanazine degradates. This is both a new area and it has a lot of challenges, and so if I don't explain things well, I'd be happy to answer that better. What this shows is this is actually an X-ray crystallographic image of a cyanazine molecule, and cyanazine is an herbicide that was introduced for use on crops starting in 1971. However, use of it was discontinued in 1999 because of concerns about it getting into groundwater and because of its toxicity. The drinking water standard for cyanazine is 1 microgram per liter, so that's 1,000 times more rigorous than the drinking water standard for nitrate, for example. And production of it was stopped in 1999, and its registration was discontinued in 2002. So it's been off the market now for nearly 20 years. And the parent compound of cyanazine breaks down in the environment quite easily. But what we have found is that the degradates are just remarkably persistent in the environment. And our sampling programs have included herbicides and herbicide degradates since 2005, and we were surprised when cyanazine degradates showed up at levels that were above the drinking water standard. And we have been even more surprised at how much it has stuck around. And prior to 2019, there was only one lab in the United States that could test water for cyanazine degradates, and that was the USGS Organic Geochemistry Research Lab in Kansas. However, and there have been difficulties with other labs being able to replicate that results. One of the things is that if you have a product that's off the market, you don't have standards to compare results to. You know, a standard being where you have a sample that has an unknown quantity and you have something that has a known concentration of that to use it as a standard. Well, it's allowed in the country. Very hard to get those standards. It'd be easy for us to compare it to cocaine. That'd be easy to find, but cyanazine standards have been difficult to get. So there've been a number of challenges there. The question came up about the drinking water standards. The cyanazine degradates do not have their own drinking water standards. So what the Department of Health recommends is in those situations where you have a chemical that has breakdown products that don't have their own standard, what you do is in a particular sample or well or whatever is you add up all of those degradates and you compare them to the drinking water standard for the parent compound. So for the cyanazine degradates, we do use that 1 microgram per liter drinking water standard. Another complication is that cyanazine has a couple of degradates in common with atrazine, which is a very common herbicide. And so it complicates tracing whether the degradate has come from cyanazine or whether it has come from atrazine. Our practice, and this is also what the Department of Agriculture does, is if there are other cyanazine degradates in a well sample, then we consider those atrazine degradates that are in common as to be cyanazine degradates as well. If they occur by themselves, then we consider them to be atrazine degradates. The Dakota County's sampling for cyanazine degradates in private wells has had 3 phases. One of these has been, the largest of these has been part of the county's ambient groundwater quality study, which went from 1999 to 2019. This was a longitudinal study where we had what ended up as a total of 77 wells that were all over the county, and they were selected to be geographically representative and also to represent the 3 main drinking water aquifers in the county: the unconsolidated sediments, the Prairie du Chien, and the Jordan. We did in 2005, and these are wells that were sampled repeatedly over the course of that 20 years. Some of the wells were sampled 16 times. Some of them were sampled less often. Most of them were sampled at least 5 times. So we have statistically valid trend information from those wells. And so we did have wells that had cyanazine over the drinking water standard in about roughly 20% of our our wells, starting around 2005. And part of the ambient program is the wells. These are private drinking water wells. We only sample them with the owner's permission. And after each sampling event, the owner does get a copy of their results with an explanation of what they are. And if they need, if we recommend water treatment, we also tell them what kind of water treatment would be effective for the issue that's in their well. In 2017, because of the ongoing detections of cyanazine degradates, we did an expanded study where we looked at the 10 wells from the ambient study that had the highest cyanazine degradates in them, and we invited well owners within a half mile of that to also get their wells tested. So that was an additional, I think it was 100. Anyway, I'm not going to quote a number. I'll get it wrong. So what this figure shows are those first two sampling efforts. I mean, or phases of our sampling. And what you can see here is there's a lot of similarity between where we have high cyanazine levels and where we have high nitrate levels. Because we have enough information to establish trends, and the three things that we found that were the highest risk factors for having elevated cyanazine in a well is, first of all, the depth of the well, where the shallower the well is, the more likely it is to have high cyanazine in it. In an agricultural area, an agricultural land use, of course, and elevated nitrates in the well is also a good indicator. And what this shows is this is from the ambient study. These are the 4 herbicide breakdown products that have been most commonly detected in our ambient study. They are Alachlor ESA, which is a breakdown product of Alachlor, Metolachlor ESA, and Metolachlor OXA, which are breakdown products of Metolachlor, and DCAC is the most commonly detected of the cyanazine degradates. And with the use pattern for each of these are all crop herbicides, which are predominantly what we have focused our testing on. And Alachlor ESA is another herbicide that's no longer on the market, but it's more recent. It hasn't been used very much for a number of decades, but its registration was actually ended in 2016. With Metolachlor, the use has been relatively steady throughout our sampling period, and it is one of the most commonly used herbicides on crops in Minnesota. Nothing is used at the same level as glyphosate, but it's probably a second there. What we see here with the Alachlor degradate is just as you would expect. It's no longer being used, and so we have far more wells where the levels are going down than we do levels that are going up. With Metolachlor, the breakdown products, it's kind of nice to see we actually have we have slightly more wells that are going down than are going up, but it's generally stable. The weird thing, and cyanazine is just weird, is we actually have more wells with cyanazine levels that are going up than we have wells that are going down. And we are not experts in the fate and transport of herbicides and herbicide degradates. So we just look at these as results, and we don't know the mechanics of what's going on here. What we will say is that the results that we're seeing are that the levels in shallow wells are not going down very much, but the levels in deeper wells they are starting to go up there. So it's so that the cyanazine is migrating and getting deeper, but it is not going away the way we would expect. The Department of Agriculture, while we've been doing this sampling in cooperation with the U.S. Geological Survey, the Department of Agriculture here in the state of Minnesota has a very broad herbicide monitoring program, but they had technical challenges in being able to test for cyanazine degradates. They could test for the parent compound, but we have only found one sample in all the time we've been doing this. We've only found one sample that was of the cyanazine parent compound. It's all been the breakdown products, and but in 2019, the Department of Agriculture was finally able to run tests for cyanazine. They also, because their own laboratory has limited capacity, they worked with a lab in California called WEC Laboratories to get them to be able to do cyanazine degradate testing as well in order to really start sampling private wells in addition to their own kind of standard monitoring well sampling program. So what the plan was in 2019 is that we worked with the Department of Agriculture, and they were going to do a certain number of wells, and this was all wells that had cyanazine degradates detected in them in the past at levels above half of the drinking water standard, so 0.5 of a microgram. And there were 150 well owners were offered the opportunity to get their well tested, and 84 of those, the samples were collected by the Department of Agriculture, and they analyzed those 84, and they also sent a batch of them to WEC laboratories to do split samples, and then they sent a third set of the samples to the USGS for them to do the testing. Dakota County sampled additional wells, so the total number sampled was 121, and we also sent those samples to WEC laboratories. What we found was the results that the Department of Agriculture and WEC laboratories came up with were very similar to what we had been finding all along. Now, in the course of this, the USGS was not able to analyze the samples, and in fact, their equipment broke, and they do not expect to get it to work again. So now the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and WEC laboratories are the only places in the country that can do this kind of sampling. But they did get very similar results to what the USGS had gotten in previous years. There were a few issues with the WEC laboratories to begin with, where there were a couple of the degradates where their results were noticeably higher than what the Department of Agriculture had gotten. But the Department of Agriculture worked with the lab, and so now the WEC laboratory results are consistent with what the Department of Agriculture gets. And this, and as I said, that this essentially confirmed what Dakota County had been finding all along, that this was not some kind of glitch in either our sampling technique or in what was going on with the U.S. Geological Survey. Also during 2019, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture did start sampling for cyanazine degradates outside of Dakota County. They have two big sampling programs for pesticides. one of which is what they call their ambient sampling program, which is monitoring wells in various agricultural parts of the state. But then they have their private well pesticide sampling program, which is a follow-on to the township testing program, where people who had nitrate detected through the first program have an opportunity to have their well tested for pesticides after that. And so they've Department of Agriculture is now including cyanazine degradates in their own testing. This is their results from 2019. What they did find was there were a number of wells outside of Dakota County. They did not find very many cyanazine detections in their monitoring wells, which are shallower wells. They did find cyanazine degradates in some cases over the drinking water standard, as I said, outside of Dakota County. But their findings in some ways are different from Dakota County's, in that, and so what they're, and in fact they were not consistent in their own testing from one area to another. So that they've had areas that have had high nitrate, but they didn't have a lot of cyanazine, and they didn't have cyanazine that was over the drinking water wells. Where in Dakota County, the cyanazine has been very much associated with shallow wells. In other parts of the state, it's more in medium depth wells that have high cyanazine levels. So that's actually more consistent with something that's not being used anymore, that it's migrating lower. And so there are just some differences between what they have found and what Dakota County has found. Another thing is that the communities that had a lot of private wells that exceed the cyanazine degradates were the ones in Dakota County and Scott County and Washington County. In other words, in the metro area. And they don't have an explanation for that. I think we're all assuming that has something to do with the way cyanazine was marketed back in the 70s and 80s. That it's not a factor of geology. It's a matter of where the product was used. So there's still a lot of unknowns as far as cyanazine is concerned. So in terms of where we are now, what I want you to understand, what I'm trying to show with this figure is that we have a lot of information about nitrate, and we understand where it is, and we understand where it's coming from. And we just feel like we have a good handle on what the situation is with that. With cyanazine, even though Dakota County has done more sampling for this than anybody else probably in the world, we don't have a good handle on where we have elevated cyanazine. What the map on the right shows is our where we have cyanazine testing in private wells. The white communities are places where we don't have any sampling for cyanazine degradates. The blue ones are communities where we've sampled one or two wells, and none of them have exceeded the drinking water standard. In the yellow are wells, are areas where more than 5% of the wells that we've sampled have exceeded the drinking water standard. The amber color is 10% or more, and the red ones are 20% or more of the wells that we have sampled have exceeded that standard. But I would guess there are probably about 3,000 households in Dakota County that are at risk for having elevated cyanazine in their private wells, and we've sampled about 280 of those. Particularly those communities that you see here that are in the blue, that are in the eastern part of the county. So this is the city of Hastings, this is Ravenna Township, and this is Douglas Township. And we think the reason that so far they look good is because we just haven't looked at enough wells there yet. The cyanazine, one of the things with nitrate is it's incredibly cheap to sample for it. And with the cyanazine degradates, with herbicides as a package, when we were sending the samples to the U.S. Geological Survey, that was more than $1,000 a sample. With WEC laboratories, it's down to about $400 a sample, but it's still very expensive for us to conduct that kind of sampling, or for the state, for that matter. It's also something where there's no lab where a private homeowner can just go and get their water tested for this. It's something that has to be done as part of a research project. So there's a lot of challenges with this. And currently, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and the Dakota County have a work group to develop a statewide strategy for identifying where these issues are, and how this is going to be addressed in the long term. This is one case where it's not a matter of changing any practices. That's already done. It's a matter of dealing with a problem that is surprisingly persistent, and is also expensive and challenging to test for. One of the things that the Department of Agriculture is doing is they have a request for proposals out where they want a laboratory that will offer testing that's for cyanazine only, not a whole list of parameters, but they are hoping to get cyanazine degradates by themselves at a lower cost, because that would make a huge difference in being able to really understand the full scope of the problem on a statewide basis. That ends my remarks, and I would like to particularly thank my colleagues with Dakota County, Vanessa DeMuth, Bill Olson, and Steve Scott, who recently retired, for all of their work in these areas. We all have different strengths that we work on, and I really appreciate their efforts and the assistance of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture in addressing this. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much, Jill. Is there any questions out there? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat at this moment, but you can certainly put them in the chat, or you could also unmute. Oh, it looks like we have one here now in the chat. Any detections of neonics?
We have done limited sampling for neonicotinoids, and I know that the Department of Agriculture includes neonicotinoids in their testing, and we've had them detected in the groundwater. They have been well below drinking water standards, but of course, drinking water really isn't the issue with neonicotinoids. It's the impact on pollinators, and so there are issues there. There are some parts of western Minnesota where the Department of Agriculture has found some of the neonicotinoids in surface water at levels where they're concerned that there's an ecological hazard there. But it's something that we are monitoring and are aware of the issues on. And the county has changed its own practices on county property in terms of using neonicotinoid pesticides. I missed that question. Okay. Yeah, the question was about the drinking water supply management area for Hastings, and I will say that there's the hole that seems to be in the center of the Hastings to Wisma is actually the city of Vermilion to Wisma. So it's still a Dewisma, it's just for a different city. The one of the results of the Hastings area nitrate study 20 years ago was to show that the Vermilion River contributes to the groundwater in the city of Hastings. That and what you see here is a large chunk of the Vermilion River watershed, and particularly this southern lobe that is the south branch of the Vermilion River, because there's a fair amount of evidence that the river has gaining reaches, which is to say the groundwater comes into the Vermilion River in the upper part of the watershed that's west of Highway 52. And then east of Highway 52, it's a losing reach. There's a deep buried bedrock valley, and there's high nitrates in the groundwater in the watershed up here in the South Branch, and so there's a fair amount of evidence that the river is transporting more nitrate into the city of Hastings because of this reversal between the gaining reaches and losing reaches in the river, and that's why the Hastings to Wisma is so unusually large.
Okay, it looks like we've got some additional questions here in the chat. So we've got one here about the level of concern, if you are experiencing any kind of concern from homeowners when you are sharing this with them about their wells.
Yes. One of the things that is relatively fortunate is that cyanazine levels are successfully removed from drinking water with a reverse osmosis system. And in fact, reverse osmosis is more effective at removing cyanazine than it is at removing nitrate. It's good at nitrate. It's the recommended treatment. But it's even better at removing cyanazine. So yeah, people can be surprisingly indifferent to having high nitrate in their wells. We get people all the time who say, well, I've been drinking this water my whole life, and I'm 80 years old and it hasn't killed me yet. Where there's just a stronger visceral reaction to any kind of herbicide problem. So yes, people are concerned about it.
All right, and then the next comment here is about the chloride levels in private wells, and if that's what those levels are, if it's concerned for drinking water or if it's just for that connection to the surface water.
The chloride levels, like everywhere in the metro, chloride levels in Dakota County's drinking water wells and drinking water aquifers, chloride levels are going up, and but they are not at levels that are above. There's an aesthetic standard for chloride in wells, and it even though the levels are going up, they're still below that. So we are concerned about it. And if you're familiar with the Pollution Control Agency's chloride plan, the potassium chloride fertilizer is a significant source of chloride in drinking water. And so part of our acre plan is to encourage farmers to follow best management practices with potassium chloride fertilizer, and also to look at alternative sources of potassium. So it's not a health concern at this point, but it is an ecological concern, and as you mentioned, a concern about where the groundwater feeds into surface water, the elevated chloride there.
Great. So we have a few more comments in here. We have one asking if anybody can comment on why nitrogen fertilizer is applied in the fall at all. And is it really economical for farmers to apply this type of nitrogen fertilizer?
The reason the reason for putting it on in the fall is that in the spring, especially in Minnesota, where we have a very short growing season, in the spring, farmers want to be able to get out in the fields and plant their crops as soon as the soil is dry enough and warm enough for them to get out there. And the idea is that by putting the fertilizer on in the fall, that they would save a step in the spring. So the fertilizer piece of what they have to do at the time of planting would already be taken care of. And in parts of the state where you have a lot of clay in the soils, that's actually a pretty good plan. But it's in the parts of the state that have coarse textured soils where they just, if there's a lot of clay in the soil, that fertilizer that's put down in the fall sticks there. But if it's coarse textured soils, there's a good possibility that with the snow and the snow melt and the rain, that it'll get washed away. So it's one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. Also, a lot of times the fertilizer dealers offer deals in the fall. So there are economic reasons for doing it then.
And then I'll skip ahead. We have just another kind of agricultural related question. Do you survey farmers about their ag practices, specifically nitrogen fertilizer rates and timing and method of application? Plus, if a farmer has livestock, do you survey their manure management practices?
We have not surveyed them. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture did one of their very intensive surveys in the Hastings area back during the Hastings area nitrate study, and they will be repeating that process, but for the Hastings, for farmers within the Hastings DeWisma, as part of implementing the groundwater rule. But Dakota County does not do that kind of surveying at this time, and it's information that farmers are not required to provide. So we get our information either through that farmers who volunteer the information, or we infer it either from what the information that the State Department of Agriculture or the USDA have collected. So we get the information secondhand. In terms of manure practices, Dakota County really doesn't have a significant number of large livestock operations, and so we don't really view manure practices as being a significant source of the nitrate issue in the county. One of the reasons that we actually started doing this sampling for herbicide breakdown products was as a tracer to figure out where nitrate was coming from. And what we found was that there was such an incredibly high correlation between crop herbicides and nitrate levels in a particular area that it's really the smoking gun in terms of crop, row crop agriculture being the primary source of nitrate contamination in Dakota County. We don't really, there are places where manure is a significant source, but it's not in Dakota County.
All right, and then we have a question asking if the findings in Dakota County has created concern in other counties or states.
I would have to say I don't know the answer to that question. I think it should, but I'm not aware of it. And I know that this is something that the Department of Agriculture is working on.
And then we've got one last question here, if you've got time to stick around here. Please describe the history of the U of M Umore Park for supporting research beyond just their wells for sampling.
The Umore Park was the site of all kinds of agronomic research for decades, and back in the early 2000s, unfortunately, they converted a large part of their research facility into a gravel mine, and so they have been. There has been useful research that has come out of the site. It's a little more hit and miss since the university has been trying to develop the site. But we've also, the University of Minnesota Extension, both at Umore Park and also working with private cooperators in the county, have done nitrogen fertilizer research here in Dakota County as well as other places. And that's been particularly helpful because those growing corn on irrigated coarse textured soils, that's Dakota County's problem area. It's also the issue in the central sands of Minnesota, but it's been less researched than the fertilizer practices on other soil types. So we've appreciated the work that they've done, but we'd actually like to see more of it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning, Jill, and sharing your very important and interesting work with our group. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's been my pleasure. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it really seems like groundbreaking work, the kind of work you've been doing down there, Jill. And thanks so much for coming and telling us about it. I didn't know half of the kind of work you had been doing in Dakota County. So yeah, thanks for coming and speaking to us about it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. As you can tell, I like talking about it.
Yeah, it's great. Very nice. So for those of you still with us, you can, just a reminder, you can see our recorded seminars, and this is one of them, on a YouTube channel if you would like to see past seminars or rewatch them. You can see them, and the link to that is on our slide here. If you can't copy that, just contact one of us and we can provide you with a link to those seminars. Our next talk is going to be on April 22nd by Jim Walsh from MDH. He's going to be talking about the MDH pathogens research in groundwater, another engaging and I can probably guarantee you disquieting seminar as well. So, with that, thanks for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.